So thank you for being here, Claire, Adrián, and Edward. This is the session on how the world is changing to bioeconomy for good. Well, I think we're going to have a really nice conversation with you being specialists in these areas from different regions of the world, from Europe, from Latin America, UK, and I would like to introduce all of you in just a few sentences of each. So Claire Skentelbery, she's in Brussels, right? And she has worked in scientific associations for the last 20 years, starting in Cambridge, UK, in a biotech cluster, and as a founder of the Council of European Bioregions. In this bioregions, she has moved to Brussels, taking the role as the Secretary General of the European Biotechnology Network. Claire then became Director General for the Nanotechnology Industries Association before joining EuropaBio in 2020, also as Director General. Just a short description of EuropaBio, but you can explain more when you would like. EuropaBio is the European Association for Bioindustries, committed to the socially responsible use of biotechnology to improve quality of life, prevent, diagnose, and treat diseases, and improve the quality and quantity of food and feedstuffs to move towards a bio-based and zero-waste economy. So that's the introduction for Claire, and she will be talking about Europe's Green Deal as well, and how EuropaBio is making a landmark in this area. Introducing the other speakers, we have Adrián Rodríguez from CEPAL or ECLAC. He is the head of Agriculture Development and Biodiversity Unit within the Division of Natural Resources of ECLAC CEPAL. He has a PhD in Agriculture Economics and a master's degree in Agriculture and Economics from Penn State, and a bachelor's degree in Economics at the University of Costa Rica. He has been a specialist in rural development at the Inter-American Institute for Agriculture Cooperation and advisor to many ministries. He has been Deputy Director and Professor of School of Economics of the University of Costa Rica. And Dr. Rodríguez is the main bioeconomy specialist in ECLAC. In that condition, he has been principal in drafting the National Bioeconomy Strategy of Costa Rica, and he is member of the International Advisory Council of Global Bioeconomy and FAO's International Sustainable Bioeconomy Working Group. And he will be talking about the context of Latin America, bioeconomy in Latin America, and how ECLAC is supporting these governments. Also, we have with us Edward Perello. Edward Perello leads venture creation in food and agriculture in Deep Science Ventures, where he works with corporate innovation, government funders, and sustainability philanthropies to develop applied science companies to transform the way humans produce food and impact nature. He has consulted and conducted research in public policy, biotechnology, national and natural security. He's an ELBI Biosecurity Fellow, a SynBio Leap Fellow, and has consulted for Google, DeepMind, and Netflix. Edward formerly co-founded Desktop Genetics, a provider of CRISPR genome editing tools, and serves on the IUCN Synthetic Biology Task Force. He previously worked in science and technology for the European Union, and arms control charity Verdict, and synthetic biology competition iGEM. He holds a bachelor's degree in bioveterinary science from London's Royal Veterinary College and a master's in philosophy in bioscience enterprise from the University of Cambridge. In 2017, he was listed on the Forbes 30 under 30. So thank you so much for being with us here. And let's get a kickoff question with Claire. How about that? Would you like to add anything about your introduction, just in case? This is an informal conversation, so feel free to budge in. Maybe you'd like to add anything.
No, you gave an incredibly comprehensive introduction, so that was extremely kind. Thank you, Gabriella. No, I think within EuropaBio, and I've worked myself in biotechnology as supporting small company development and supporting ecosystem development for it for an incredibly long time. So I definitely wouldn't be in the Forbes 40 under 40 or 30 under 30 now, unfortunately. But really, I see now, particularly with where we sit right now in terms of climate change demands, which are incredibly important, but also as we are trying to emerge from COVID and manage a post-COVID or slightly post-COVID world, it changes a lot of the parameters as to what biotechnology can do. So I think it's been super interesting over the last 2 years to look at how biotechnology as an enabling technology would be applied into the Green Deal anyway. But now a lot of the investment and the sort of manufacturing priorities have also shifted as to what they are and where they are. So for biotechnology, it's an incredibly exciting time as such a strong enabler and a delivery mechanism for much lower carbon footprints, pretty much across all sectors.
So Claire, let's make an introduction to our audience about this Green Deal, because many are from Costa Rica, from Latin America, and they may have heard about it, but you're in the soup. So that would be more interesting. We all know that within the European Commission, the top commander, the president of the European Commission, has set it as one of the top priorities for continuous development and productivity in all of the European nations. So that means they're investing a lot, trillions of euros in this. And we already know that Europe comes from a long history of growing into a knowledge-based economy. So tell us a little bit more how this Green Deal is setting in, reactions, and what EuropaBio is doing in this area.
Sure. I mean, the Green Deal is obviously, it's just a name, but it covers an enormous sort of ambitious strategy to make Europe more, or in fact, to make Europe carbon neutral by 2050 and reduce it substantially by 2030. And it's, the realities of climate change are here every day for all countries now. Even in our sort of mild and benign Belgium, we have gone from extremely hot summers to extremely wet summers, and we've had massive floods this year. And you can see how this is a massive negative impact on people's quality of life, their ability to provide food. So I don't think anybody is unaware in Europe that this is having a profound impact on quality of life and ability to live a normal life. So, but the Green Deal was coming long before, indeed, the Green Deal was being developed before we saw some more recent years of extreme weather patterns as well. So this has been sort of cooking up for quite a long time, very much linked to the Paris Accord. And I think Europe had recognized that it needed to use its strengths as a sort of a collection of countries to act more uniformly, because nobody in Europe is large enough to do this competitively or realistically on their own. So it's an enormous framework into which lots of policies fit. And when you describe it as soup, it's a very complex soup. It's got a lot of different ingredients, a lot of different textures, and the eating is often further away than you think it might be. But there's where we are now with Europe is the translation of this strategy and this intention into policies and legislation that are going to enable us to deliver them. So we've got a climate law that is now enshrined. Can you hear me okay, Gabriella?
Sorry, I need to interrupt you. I think we need to speak louder.
Oh, okay. I can creep forwards as well, if that helps at all. So the Green Deal is now being translated into policies and legislation through which it will be delivered through industry and research and public activities. So it's translating the concept into reality is obviously the really complex part of this. So Europe has brought forward European climate law to enshrine this into law. And it's been very interesting how we've seen other people use legal action to ensure that countries are reaching being climate consistent. You know, we've seen a number of successful prosecutions against the Paris Agreement to say that a country's particular industrial strategy is not in accord with the Paris Agreement. And so countries must change their national policies. And so it's a very powerful weapon to put this kind of strategy into EU law. So we have the climate law, we've got a European Climate Pact, where we try to bring citizens together to be much more aware of how climate change is impacting us and how every aspect of our life is really going to have to change to deliver it. We have our 2030 target, climate target, to really start to move to reduce carbon dioxide or the carbon footprint of Europe. And of course, 2030 is only 9 years away. It's really, really not very long away. It's 8 harvests from now, which is a really short-term goal. And we also have a new EU strategy on climate adaptation to try and make it climate resilient. You know, as everybody has seen, and I've already mentioned, we've had a lot of adverse weather conditions, from floods to fires, and Europe needs to be able to predict and respond and recover from those, because they are the new reality, unfortunately, for now. But of course, it's very complex. So, and you can't just click your fingers and go, now I will produce less carbon dioxide either from this sector or using this technology. It requires looking at energy infrastructure, environmental standards. Transport, of course, has always been a huge source of carbon emissions in Europe, in fact, worldwide. You know, how we look at regional policy, how regions within European countries can implement and sustain policies that will deliver the Green Deal. We have to look very much at sustainable finance. So that's also an aspect that Europe's looking at very closely to say, you know, how do you make this possible? Because of course, for many years, using petrochemical options, using quite long supply chains, this can be very cheap, and the world has stretched its supply chains to become as cheap as possible. So when you need to replace a very cheap but environmentally damaging technology, it's going to cost you money, and we need to work out how we fund that change until it can become competitive and sustainable. We're also looking, you know, Europe is not an island. We sit within a very small world, as we're always aware of now. So it's how international trade and sustainable development is undertaken together, because again, you could look at Europe and go, well, we're doing really well on our climate change goals, but when we're one of the largest importers from soy-based food products from South America, how many of those goals are real, and how much are we buying in that gets around the goals that we've set ourselves? So nothing exists in isolation, and international trade is an absolutely key part of that. Obviously, we've also got R&D. Europe has always been a powerhouse for early stage R&D, and so we have been applying this into climate mitigating types of innovations. But of course, those innovations have to be delivered and taken up and used at large scale. The existence of that technology does not mean that it has solved any climate change goals. And so we will talk later, I think, about some of the funding and research mechanisms that Europe is now using to ensure that very strong early stage science is translating into industrially applicable uptake. So really, you can see it's very complex. And sitting within that as well, we also have Europe's new industrial strategy, because we're looking at how we develop an economically viable future. The Green Deal has to sit within a competitively resilient Europe. So it cannot sit in isolation. So we have our industrial strategy, which is being delivered right now. And of course, when you look at it within the context of addressing COVID as well, we're looking at how global supply chains can be both sustainable and resilient. So what was complex before, when it was just the Green Deal, is now even more complex, where we're looking at economic recovery, making a more secure set of supply chains around the world. You know, we're making things interesting for ourselves, for sure.
No doubt about that. Well, thank you, Clara. That's a big amount of information that I know, even though bioeconomy is coming in for good, there is a lot of transitions that must be dealt with, and everything that was optimized for a specific industry, now the change of ingredients or technologies or processes in order to be more sustainable will be very complex. So it's interesting as well to see how Europe is seeing this from the government standpoint, from the private sector, and finance as well as a conjunction. So that brings me into speaking with Adrián, because as one of the leading persons supporting the governments in Latin America to develop bioeconomy strategies, we'd like to know what you think are the main roles of the government in drafting these national bioeconomy strategies and for developing bioeconomy in each of the countries. So as you see, we're coming in from seeing these examples in Europe, but I know that Latin America has advanced a great deal and it's not leading behind at all in bioeconomy, thanks in part to your efforts. So we'd like to hear more about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Gabriela, for your kind introduction. Good morning for those in this side of the Atlantic. Good afternoon for you in Europe. Yes, there is no doubt that governments have a fundamental role to play in supporting the bioeconomy and bioeconomy development strategies. I will highlight three issues that I think are relevant. First, to provide leadership and vision. Second, to encourage participation and provide information. And third, to ensure policy coherence. In terms of leadership and vision, I think the most fundamental issue is the commitment, to have commitment at a high political level. I will be speaking for about, when I refer to strategy development in Latin America, there will be basically three cases, which are the case of Costa Rica, Colombia, and Uruguay. Though the Costa Rica and Colombian strategies have been already launched, and the Uruguay one is about to be. And there are lots of developments on bioeconomy in other countries related, like bioeconomy in Brazil and Argentina, but they don't have yet a national strategy. In Argentina, there has been a lot of work on the regional dimension. So, and high political commitment is being in place in both Colombia, Costa Rica, and Uruguay, and not only in one specific government term, but in different government terms. The initiatives in Costa Rica started in the last administration. In Colombia started with also in the previous administration. And in Uruguay, the process started also under one administration and is being pushed forward with the government that started a year ago. A second area where I think is important is positioning the bioeconomy at the core of sustainable development policies. And in that regard, I would say something that relates to what Claire was mentioning about global commitments, for example, and policy processes. And I think very fundamental of pushing forward Agenda 2030, 8 years from now, and the national determined contributions in the framework of the Paris Agreement of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and in general, commitments to decarbonize the economy. And that regarding policy providing leadership and vision, I think those elements are very, very important. In terms of encouraging participation and provide information, there is a very high, very important role in convening relevant stakeholders and bringing them to the table to discuss the objectives, priority areas, mechanisms, etc. Government agencies, private sector, science and technology, financing and funding agencies, and in general, relevant stakeholders and organizations from the civil society. Open in that context spaces for dialogue during the process of elaboration of the strategy is very important. It's been the case in most countries. For example, through seminars, workshops, webinars, and similar activities. In the case of the private sector, I think it is very important to have participation from the beginning of several ministries, or at least the most relevant ones, so that there is empowerment from the beginning from the various sectors of the government, representative of different areas of the economy. And I would point to science and technology, agriculture, in industry and environment, which has been the case in Costa Rica, and pretty much similar in the cases of Uruguay and Colombia. And those having that is very important. There is always a leading organization. In the case of Costa Rica, the Ministry of Science and Technology. In the case of Uruguay, has been the Ministry of Livestock and Agriculture. And having those mechanisms in place from the beginning in the form of interministerial group, for example, in the case of Costa Rica, has been very useful to. And in the case of Uruguay, what they call the mesa chica, the small table where most of the relevant stakeholders also participated. And in the case of other sectors, it's very important to strengthen or create alliances from the beginning with key stakeholders, key organizations in the private sector. In Costa Rica, the role of CR Biomed has been very important, very supportive. Gabriela has been very active, and other members from the academia and the government and private enterprises and startups also. In the academic sector, it has been important, the link, the support of the Center for High Technology of Senat is called, they have 4 labs, I think, and there have been 2 very supportive of the process, Nanotech, which is on nanotechnology, and the one on biotechnology. Those have been allies along the process. Also important to mention the engagement of youth entrepreneurs. The case of the the local chapter, the Costa Rican chapter of the Latin American Young Leaders on Biotechnology has been very important. And I think that is a very important feature because the bioeconomy is about the future. And so it is important to have young leaders who in the near future will be policymakers, entrepreneurs, scientists, etc. And also several schools, and I will not go in detail, several schools and research centers at universities. And that has been very similar in other countries. And also important to develop mechanisms to facilitate cooperative work, for example, through interministerial groups or public-private dialogue mechanisms. That is important. In terms of ensuring policy coherence, it relates to what I mentioned about providing leadership and vision. The issue of bioeconomy is multi-sectoral, so the need for aligning or bringing policy coherence to sectoral policies in agriculture, environment, science and technology, innovation, finance, that's very important. Having this match in general between productive development and conservation policies, I think in Costa Rica is very relevant. Bioeconomy, it supports productive development as well as conservation efforts. So that coin, those both sides of the coin are very important. Aligning incentives and investments is also really relevant. Political willingness to provide the legal and regulatory changes needed to enable to the development of the bioeconomy are very important. It is often the case we are in some cases dealing with very novel technologies, products, and so we are at the edge of the knowledge and technology, and sometimes the legal frameworks in place do not reflect those new realities. And so political commitment to go in changing or adjusting those legal frameworks is really important. And finally, to strengthen the innovation ecosystem for the bioeconomy, I would say that it is also really important, especially if we are talking about the more advanced sectors or initiatives of the bioeconomy. So in 10 minutes, that's what I would say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very interesting because we're seeing that international cooperation is a strong main factor within the creating of the strategies and also implementation. And since you mentioned about the interministerial committee of Costa Rica, we're going to have a surprise at the end of our session about that, of the case in Costa Rica. And this brings me to the topic about public-private collaborations, which is extremely important in this phase. So going back to Claire and Edward, we'll get back to you in just a bit. If you want to hold on for the presentation just a tiny bit, and then we'll delve deep into deep science ventures to show an exact example of company creations in bioeconomy. First, I'd like to go really quickly through Claire and Adrián again, just to complement this example of the need to do public-private partnerships in order to do this transformation. Because as you said, Claire, at the beginning, you're integrating different policies in order to make it a seamless way for the private sector. So just a few examples from you of what EuropaBio is doing in that sense and how the companies are taking it. And then for Adrián, just a short example of within this context context of volatility, how adequate implementation in Latin America?
Well, let me jump in on the public-private partnerships thing, because this is something that's always been very close to my heart, because obviously you can always fund a lot of really great research, but often the programs through which you fund research, if they're very academically oriented, they do amazing breakthrough research, but what you need to do is mature that and translate it. And often that's where Europe is weaker. And so in the last decades, it's developed public-private partnership platforms, both in healthcare and in the bioeconomy. And they're really good because they are designed, they've been designed specifically to try and enable technologies to be developed fully in line with where industry priorities are and the ways in which industry can act. Because you can have really great technologies come out, but they may not be suitable for uptake by industry. And you don't find that out until the end of a project. You've got a fabulous technology and it doesn't go anywhere. So the example that we was been speaking about before is the bio-based industries joint undertaking. And the public-private part of that is essentially you've got a large industrial consortium of dozens and dozens of companies, including some of our members such as BASF, DSM, really big global players who line up and say, for everything that the European Commission invest in, we will invest into that same research. And they've come together and built a consortium where they set out industrial priorities to go, we want to achieve this in 5 years. And these are the technical and regulatory bottlenecks that exist to be able to do that. Because once we've conquered that, we can scale up massively on a global basis. And that's really what we're looking for. And is efficient use of translation of research. And so the bio-based economy joint undertaking, it's now finished, and they've started up a new one, but this originally was 3.7 billion euros of public and private money. And for every €1 the European Commission put in, 2.8 euros came from the private sector. So it was enormously impactful, and it developed let me see what we've got, over 120 projects, quite large projects, specifically looking at industrial bottlenecks in the scale up and the development of bioeconomy. And it involved over 900 different organizations, many of which, really skilled research centers, plus the industrial consortium side with very diverse companies in there. And that brought together 37 different countries, and associate countries from both inside Europe and outside Europe. So it's been incredibly impactful because it was designed to do a specific job. It wasn't trying to bend existing academic research programs or do only industrial research programs. And the new one they've set up is called the Circular Bio-Based Europe Joint Undertaking. They're not very catchy titles. But this, again, it brings investors in, it brings regulators in, so that you can do this as a unit of all the actors needed to effectively translate research into large-scale industrial uptake. So there's a huge amount of movement and give from all of the people involved in this. They've all gone out of their comfort zones to address these specific areas. So nobody's making tons of money out of this. It is all about doing something slightly differently, and you see the massive results from that in terms of the projects that they have funded and the industrial money that is pouring into then that further development of that technology.
Excellent. So there's a lot of solidarity and comprehension in that. Adrián, tell us about Latin America.
Oh, thank you. Well, lots of what Claire already mentioned are irrelevant issues for Latin America. And the first thing what I would say is that how do we understand public-private partnerships? I would say that in the private dimension, in Latin America, in general, the role of science and technology organizations in Latin America, public organizations in public universities or universities are part of that. Those are or should be part of those arrangements. And in Latin America, a very relevant issue to work is the interface between policy development and implementation, and pretty much also in the sense that Claire mentioned. And because that allows to identify bottlenecks that might exist for specific in specific situations, to find together solutions to those bottlenecks and to identify opportunities or identify areas where the opportunities are not what they seem. If you look more into patenting trends, for example. So that to start. In Latin America, we have this tendency to have policy changes when the government changes. So this volatility is something that has affected us a lot, because projects or initiatives are identified with one political sector, and when there is a change in government, there comes a new party or a new organization, group of people with different ideas, and maybe in the process, very good policies are lost. So I think public-private partnerships are very important as an alternative to deal with that situation. To pass, in Spanish, we have this way to say the políticas de gobierno a políticas de Estado, which in English will be something like to pass, to go from short-term government policies to longer-term national initiatives. So that is something that is very important in the case of public-private partnerships, having those actors supporting the possibility that something good that started in one government goes on and becomes an initiative to change to have impact in the longer term. And I think there are good examples in Costa Rica. I would mention one which is closely related to bioeconomy, which is the case of the development of the ICT cluster in Costa Rica. It started around 25 years ago, around the mid-19th. And that the work that the country has been doing there in public-private policy enabling development was very important to bring intel to Costa Rica, and that provided a push for the development of the sector. And now Costa Rica is recognized as one of the leading countries in the development of ICT solutions.
And export, yes.
And a very important sector in terms of sectors. And I find commonalities between that process and the process that it is starting now with the bioeconomy, because you have there a new emerging paradigm or sectors or group of sectors where most of the people from the private sector involved from the private sector are more open to new ideas, to be able to foresee the tendencies and not rely so much in government support in the traditional sense that government support is understood in Latin America, and to go into more collaborative arrangements. So I think this case illustrates the importance of public-private partnerships. Actually, there are some things in that regard that I probably would leave to the end for the surprise regarding the relation or how that shows in the bioeconomy strategy of Costa Rica. So
Right.
I leave it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both of you. And now to bring this down to earth a little bit, let's see the real life example of deep science ventures Edward is bringing to us. So Edward, you're living proof of a very, very interesting model for supporting the creation of bioeconomy companies, especially in the area of agriculture and mostly in ag biotech. So tell us briefly about Deep Science Ventures, your program. We're going to have a presentation from you, I believe. And what are your plans in bringing this model from the UK to Costa Rica as a test bed for Latin America?
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
And can you see my screen? Is it a full screen?
I can see your full screen.
Okay, great, because I can just see that it's coming through as 2 green columns. I want to make sure that the audience can see it reasonably well. For instance, on the Aldea link, I'm seeing that it's only coming through of a quarter on the presentation. I just want to make sure the audience can see it.
Let me.
There we go. Yeah, perfect.
Good.
That looks good on production end. If we could zoom out a little bit more on production end, I think that would be ideal, as we're still getting some cutoff on the top and the bottom with the margin. But I'll start. Yeah, perfect. Lovely. Thank you very much. So this is a proposal that I've been working on with Deep Science Ventures for over a year, with support from Gabriela, as well as Adrián and many others in Costa Rica and around Latin America in the past year. So we're proposing to develop a venture building program that we've pioneered in the UK to create a number of new deep tech startups that will be based in Costa Rica with support from the UK that can rapidly deliver solutions to market problems, so issues that customers are facing in their supply chains, whilst also delivering on sustainability and bioeconomy targets as set by the Costa Rican National Bioeconomy Strategy. And I don't have to explain the issues that all bioeconomies, effectively economies and ecosystems, are facing with climate change and biodiversity collapse. And with agriculture built on the foundation of nature, we really need to address these issues urgently and move to a regenerative form of agriculture at scale, rather than what I would refer to as a fairly destructive and extractive model today. So we see Costa Rica as really the laboratory with its various benefits of human resources, 4,000 different agricultural export products, free trade agreements with the world, and generally a great reputation for biomedical development. We see it as the laboratory for running this kind of program across Latin America and building new companies that will first build products and services in Costa Rica before expanding throughout the region of Latin America and to similar bioregions as well in the tropics, notably across Asia and Africa. So we're a company that's been based in the UK since 2016. We've built 32 new companies in that time. We're somewhere between a venture studio, incubator, accelerator, and investment fund. And we have got experts all around the world supporting what we do, as well as the companies that we create in agriculture, energy, pharmaceuticals, and computation. We start by looking at what customers need in these 4 different sectors, and we think about what it would take to create the holy grail, the product or the service or the company that is going to make the most impact in that particular market segment. And my team comes up with these concepts for products, services, and companies, doing a lot of research to figure out way before we even start building a company what that problem is and if it's high value and could support a company that could very quickly move to Series A and onward, and ideally become the fabled unicorn in any of these sectors. And then once we're happy that we've got one of these working hypotheses, we hire in a team of scientists and advisors to become founders, and we help them define the vision for that company and create that company over the course of at least 12 months, giving them everything that we know about early stage technology development, transfer, investment, fundraising, marketing, and so on. And to prove our commitment, we invest in those companies at the end of that process, and we raise money from other groups to co-invest with us. So in general, what we're trying to do is deal with one of the critical issues in innovation, which is, as I'm sure Claire and Adrián would agree, translation of basic research into the market. And our approach is, rather than focusing entirely on that, we try and create new technologies and technical and scientific projects that should exist outside of a university domain, while still collaborating with universities and the other actors in the classical innovation ecosystem. We try and involve everyone, like grant funders, institutions, scientific advisors, laboratories, and investors, but we rearrange the process so that we have a high rate of success on what we build and its growth. And I'll tell you a little bit about this process now. So as the Associate Director for Agriculture, my thesis is entirely based on regenerative bioeconomies. And all around the world, there are various grant funding organizations and sponsors that have capital that they want to invest into that mission. So I speak to them about this idea that we can change the modality of agriculture. And I've been doing this in Costa Rica. And I've then been also speaking to institutes like Cartier, Earth University, and drumming up support to work with those groups. What we are going to do is look for these areas of opportunity, effectively small clusters of problems and opportunities that exist in agriculture, where we could conceivably or feasibly create new companies. Once we at DSV are happy with this, and once we've worked with a few different university partners that are willing to support the work and help us do experiments early on, we start hiring for a unique position at Deep Science Ventures called a founding analyst. We're looking for a talented scientist with an entrepreneurial aspiration. They want to build a company, but they don't know what they want to build yet. They don't have an idea. And they join us initially as an analyst. We hand over the research that we've done to them in the agriculture team and with the support of these universities. And we say, we are thinking roughly of building this. Tell us why we're wrong and how we would do it better, given that you're an expert in this particular area. And we give them a year to refine this concept. As it starts to get better defined, we bring on advisors from the university who have a desire to join a new company, maybe get some shares in it, but also experience the entrepreneurial process firsthand. And then we come to an agreement on what the technical approach will be to solve the problem that we care about. And each founding analyst can develop multiple different approaches to creating a startup that could lead to game-changing intellectual property. And ideally, they'll conduct that work on site with the university in their research laboratory while still recruiting more advisors, recruiting additional founders to join their team, all paid for by DSV and the sponsors, even before the company is incorporated. And then at the end, once we've done that initial work, and we've spoken to the IP lawyers, and we know that we've got freedom to operate, and we've spoken to customers, and we know that they'll buy the kind of products that we want to develop, we will then at that point incorporate a new startup company with the support of investors that are also aligned to that mission. And so at the end of this process, what we have is, for each opportunity area, at least one, and ideally more companies that can solve the mission problem whilst also delivering against the market need and solving a critical issue in the supply chain, as well as yielding the social and environmental outcome that we have in mind. So that's the process. We've built 32 companies. The majority of them have been developed through this process, and only a couple have died along the way in the last 5 years. So it's really about figuring out how to build the best company that should exist and figuring all the ways to ensure that we can kill that company, that we've ruled that out before we start it. And so the key difference with this model versus your classical ecosystem hub or a university or an accelerator is that we are providing support for every step of the process from day one. We're not just relying on very technical scientists to come up with what they think could be a good product for a market where in fact a problem doesn't actually exist or has been solved. One of the issues that we often see is that because scientists are very narrowly focused in a particular technical domain, that is to say their PhD or postdoc subject, they tend not to consider alternative ways of solving a problem. What we do is we try to theorize every way that a problem could be solved, and we also then verify that with the market before we start the company. And that's something investors really want to see. The other key piece is that we're creating entirely new intellectual property that can be 100% owned by the company that's formed, which is, again, is something that investors want to see. They don't necessarily want to invest in a new company where the university has taken 50% of the shares up front, even before it's raised money. And yet we still involve these universities by basing the new company on their site, working with the faculty to get the support of the advisors, and oftentimes even creating relationships between the university and the new company that lead to public-private grants that they would not be able to access on their own. So we've run this program in Scotland, and we've been doing this since March of last year. We had support from the UK's National Biotech Funding Agency and the Roslin Institute. It's based at the University of Edinburgh, and the model has been very successful, focusing across 3 different areas: animal agriculture, pollinator reinforcement, and controlled environments. We've got one company which is looking at farming zooplankton as an alternative to fish meal. We have 2 pollination companies, one which is focused on the use of flies as a pollinator, in particular tackling issues with their storage and distribution. Another pollinator company concept, which is looking at assisted reproduction of solitary bees, great pollinators, but not very good at reproducing. And we can do this for native bees all around the world. And then a controlled environment company, which is using fungus as a biofertilizer for the forestry industry to get 50% increase in tree growth, whilst also creating a fungal layer that can sequester carbon and unlock carbon credits for the customers and the company itself. So that's just one example of a national venture studio or venture building program. And we have recently raised funding from the Crusoe Foundation to do this same kind of program in Costa Rica. And so we will be looking to do the same model, recruiting both Costa Rican and Latin American scientists to be founding analysts, to come to the UK, to train them on how our process works, to get these promising young individuals to think beyond their scientific training and to help them become fully realized entrepreneurs. And the 10 areas that we're looking, you can see here, namely in farm waste to fuel, soil health, pests and pesticides, and then specific crops that Costa Rica excels at or otherwise grows and are highly represented in neighboring countries, so that we can build these companies, incorporate them, conduct transnational research between the UK and Costa Rica, base those companies' operations in Costa Rica, and then expand regionally for rapid growth, which will make them even more interesting for later stage investors. We have a great portfolio of project advisors, so I just want to thank everyone on this page, in particular Gabriela, who has been just exceptional in opening the door to everyone in Costa Rica, as well as Carlos Orea at Cartier and Frank Hicks, and Lawrence Pratt as well. And I have to give a special mention to Maricel, who was the first person to put me on to doing this. We met at Symbio Beta some years ago, and I mentioned to her, oh, I love Costa Rica, it would be great to do a program there. And she said, well, yeah, we could definitely do that, talk to Gabby. So that's the program, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it. And I can't wait to get started in the next few months and build some amazing agri-tech companies in Costa Rica.
Thank you, Edward. So yeah, that took a lot of trouble. I think we've taken about a year to work this into getting into people's minds and seeing that it's a model that is very, very important. One of the reasons I fell in love with the model is because I've seen over the last 20 years in Latin America and different countries that I've worked in, models trying to get either entrepreneurs matched with an MBA or get the entrepreneur to become, instead of a scientist, more of an administrator, and so many different models, and they come and go. But I think that your program, Deep Science Ventures, is exactly working on reducing so much of the risks in order to try to decrease that Death Valley issue that 90% of the startups go through. So I think it's fabulous to do it that way. And it's also giving a chance in a country like Costa Rica, where CR Biomed has been working for the last 8 years in trying to improve the business climate for biotechnology and research and development companies to develop. It's a great ground now to be able to look for a model that is a little bit different and that will match in something that will become an alliance, because at the end, what our country is needing is to improve the technology transfer skills and of showing us an example from beginning to end of how to support the companies. So these are the areas that CR Biomed will start working in the next future. And it's just an excellent timing for the Deep Science Venture Program. So I'm really happy we made it.
Certainly. And once again, just to thank you and everyone from CR Biomed, and I'm looking forward to continuing the discussions to formalize some kind of alliance with your group and many others in Costa Rica as well. I think one of the things that's so attractive about the country is how quickly one's network can grow, because it is a small country, people know each other, and it's very easy to create a program where everyone wants to help.
Exactly. So here comes the surprise of somebody who wants to help, and he will be modeling the way on how to integrate public-private partnerships. So let's welcome Federico Torres. He is Vice Minister of the Ministry of Science and Technology and Communications, and he is coordinator of the Interministerial Committee of Bioeconomy. Now, for all of you, I'm going to thank you for all of your time and the generosity of providing all these, exchanging all these experiences with us, but we will have to change to Spanish right now. And so you can stay along and share this new surprise that we're going to bring up. Entonces, señor Federico, muchísimas gracias, señor viceministro, por estar con nosotros hoy. Repito que es también coordinador del Comité Interministerial de Bioeconomía. Este Comité Interministerial de Bioeconomía es el espacio de articulación que se ha consolidado en la primera fase de implementación de la Estrategia Nacional de Bioeconomía y fue definido por los diferentes jerarcas de los 4 ministerios que involucran en esta estrategia: el de ganadería, el de economía, el de ambiente y el que usted lidera, de Ministerio de Ciencia y Tecnología. Esto para llevar a cabo la coordinación técnica y el monitoreo del avance de la implementación de la estrategia de bioeconomía. Y cuenta también con la participación del sistema de banca de desarrollo, que es parte del sistema de financiamiento en Costa Rica, y la cooperación técnica de nuestro querido amigo Adrián Rodríguez, que comparte con nosotros hoy. Adelante, Federico, encantado de tenerte aquí y que nos cuentes entonces de la novedad.
Magnífico, un saludo a todos y muchas gracias por invitarme, muy contento de participar en este evento. Edward, hi, how are you? It's very good to see you, and congratulations that your explanation about your model is truly interesting, and I think it's very important for us to pursue this kind of new models and new advances that in other countries that apply for your company. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. Ok, volvemos al español y continuamos comentándoles lo que estamos haciendo en el ámbito de bioeconomía. Desde el Comité Interministerial de Bioeconomía realmente es una alegría poder aportar dentro de la Junta Directiva de CR Biomed. Recibimos una invitación y estamos muy contentos de integrarnos y de buscar una mayor colaboración entre el clúster de CR Biomed y los esfuerzos que estamos haciendo en el marco de la Estrategia Nacional de Bioeconomía. Hemos estado analizando y cada vez más, yo creo que es parte de lo que es una realidad en nuestro país, que el país todavía tiene grandes dificultades en cómo articular realmente el trabajo de la parte gubernamental, la academia y las empresas. Y en ese proceso yo creo que esto es un avance. Entonces, la buena noticia es que estaríamos incorporándonos a esta junta directiva y también estaríamos incorporando a CRBiomed en diferentes reuniones del Comité Interministerial de Bioeconomía. Tal vez como para recordarles, es importante decir que el Comité Interministerial de Bioeconomía está conformado por 4 ministerios: el Ministerio de Ambiente y Energía, el Ministerio de Agricultura y Ganadería, y el Ministerio de Economía, Industria y Comercio, y es liderado por el MISID. Además, contamos con la presencia del Sistema de Banca de Desarrollo. Este comité tiene ya un año aproximadamente de estar operando ya después de la publicación de la Estrategia Nacional de Bioeconomía, y en este año hemos estado construyendo capacidades y apoyando con fondos y recursos diferentes proyectos, y también diseñando política pública para mejorar los procesos bioeconómicos del país. En este momento estamos listos ya para buscar una mayor integración con los procesos privados, y de allí que estamos muy contentos de integrar y de aportar e integrar a CRBiomed en esta política pública que estamos desarrollando. El objetivo de que CRBiomed participe es darnos esa visión de cómo la biotecnología podría integrarse y cómo podríamos integrar a las empresas directamente en la construcción de esta política pública. El clúster es muy flexible, y en eso pues nosotros reconocemos que definitivamente el modelo de clúster se ha aplicado muy bien en CRBiomed, y es un modelo con mucha flexibilidad que permite diferentes modelos de comunicación y participación, y por eso pues estamos muy contentos de poder apoyar dentro de la junta directiva para pues permear los esfuerzos que están haciendo las empresas costarricenses en el ámbito del clúster con la visión de política pública que estamos construyendo. También otra noticia que quería de una vez comentarles es que ya hemos iniciado el trabajo para la creación de los planes regionales de la Estrategia Nacional de Bioeconomía. Estamos en conversaciones con Mideplan. Sabemos todos que Mideplan tiene una estrategia de desarrollo territorial para nuestro país. En el marco de esa estrategia, estamos también articulando con Mideplan para el desarrollo de planes regionales que ya consideren las capacidades específicas de cada una de las regiones del país en el ámbito de cómo aprovecharlas en las empresas y cómo generar procesos de transformación productiva hacia la sostenibilidad en los negocios de las diferentes regiones de Costa Rica, obviamente aprovechando las ventajas competitivas y la capacidad de generar valor agregado que cada región tiene, que son muy diferentes en sus capacidades, y tanto a nivel de sus capacidades de innovación, que no son las mismas en las diferentes regiones de nuestro país, como también en las diferentes vocaciones, digámoslo así, productivas que podrían tener las regiones nacionales. Hablemos, por ejemplo, de las capacidades en ganadería, de la zona Huetar Norte, o de las capacidades o proyección que podría tener el Pacífico Central en ámbitos como la acuicultura, o de lo que se podría estar trabajando en el Caribe en términos también de lo que es producción marina, pero también de aprovechamiento de otras riquezas disponibles. Hay muchísimo trabajo que realizar en estos planes, y por supuesto el apoyo de CRBiomed y el apoyo de todo el sector empresarial que estamos buscando en este proceso es fundamental para que realmente podamos realizar ese desarrollo productivo integral que necesita no solo el agro, sino todos los diferentes sectores que involucra la bioeconomía. Y que por supuesto pasa por una integración constante y efectiva de la tecnología y del avance científico en los procesos productivos de las empresas. Tema que en el ámbito biotecnológico es fundamental para nuestro país. Si comparamos el desarrollo, por ejemplo, que han tenido otros países que han apostado por la bioeconomía, hablemos de España, hablemos de Francia, los artículos claramente establecen las diferentes fases en las cuales han ido evolucionando sus sistemas de innovación y sus sistemas productivos. En el caso de Costa Rica, pues tenemos muchos pasos por delante para para ponerlo en términos sencillos, para poder integrar realmente las capacidades biotecnológicas que ya están en buena medida en nuestras universidades a los procesos productivos nacionales. De allí que pues tenemos una tarea ingente que realizar y por supuesto que estamos muy contentos de esta integración binívoca en términos de que CRBiomed nos va a apoyar más en el Comité Interministerial de Bioeconomía y nosotros vamos a apoyar más también la Junta Directiva con la integración en cuenta de mi persona en algunas reuniones y de algunos delegados del Ministerio. Y Gabriela, pues eso es lo que tenía que comentarles. No sé si quieres hacer...
Vamos al cierre de esta primera.
Listo. Muchas gracias, María.
Muchísimas gracias, Federico. Efectivamente, yo creo que estamos haciendo historia en Costa Rica de esta alianza público-privada, de tantas instituciones y organizaciones en función de un objetivo común de implementar la estrategia de bioeconomía, generar más empresas para aumentar el ecosistema y principalmente trabajar en mejorar el clima de negocio, cosa que de alguna manera el clúster ha iniciado y con mucho esfuerzo de, digamos, una semillita, pero entre el clúster y el Comité Interministerial de Bioeconomía se puede potenciar notablemente. Así que con esto le dejamos la sorpresa revelada. Muchísimas gracias, Federico, por acompañarnos. Adrián, Edward, y Claire, thank you very much for being with us, and we will continue with the next session. Please stay hooked on. Bye-bye.
Very much indeed. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. My pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Llegamos al cierre de esta primera sección sobre el panorama mundial de la bioeconomía. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos.